With patch 2.5 going live on the BTR, we have seen an addition of 6 unique ground charms that break the immunity of the respective type and set monster resistances of that element to 95%. Is this going to help underpowered builds? Would that change the meta? And do I want to see this on single player? Let's dive in. Alright, so first of all, the Grand Charms. There are 6 of them and they provide bonus, as I mentioned before. They sunder the immunities. So basically they break the immunity and set monster resistance of that type to 95%, whether it is magic, poison, physical or lightning, for example. At the same time, they also provide a penalty. For all the elements like cold, fire, lightning and poison, they do minus 75% to person's resistance of that particular type. For magic it is minus 50 and for physical it is increased 25% of physical damage. Which is quite interesting because physical damage is really hard to offset. You really need the physical damage reduction, which is not so easy to get in a game, especially without sacrificing useful gear slots. Typically it's going to be your Shaco with 10%, Enigma with 8%, and maybe sometimes you can use Verdangos or String of Fears. Normally that would be enough to prevent you from getting too hard of a hit in melee, but with this extra bonus of damage, that's going to be really challenging. Minus 50% of magic resistance is even harder to offset, and yes, I'm looking at you, Safety Shield, which nobody frankly is going to use. So yeah, this is a little bit interesting to see how this penalty will work out, and it seems like some of them are not so equally balanced, because obviously getting 75 res of some extra type is way easier than getting magic or physical one. Now let's actually talk about the builds for each particular element type. So let's start with the most OP one, Cold one. Obviously Sorceress. Sorceress with her Cold Mastery already with enough plus skills can break it to minus 170 as soon as you break this 100% immunity threshold. So now all the Cold Sorcs will be the most OPS plus tier, because literally everything will immediately die inside. And if before they were constrained with quite a bit of unbreakable cold immunes, now this is no longer a problem. Even without Infinity you deal so much damage, but with Infinity all of them will be to minus 200 and you will just face roll the entire game, all the terror zones, everything absolutely easy. On the contrary, Amazon Cold Freezing Arrows will be not so great still, because well, you still need this Infinity to break this damage, and maybe with Night Wings you will be able to do something more. But it's going to be still a little bit more viable with Ice Rune Ward that also provides minus to enemy cold resistances. Zealer Paladin with Holy Freeze might be still okay, although it's not going to be OP in any occasion, because typically the damage of Holy Freeze is not so big and you will still need Infinity to really do some decent damage. Maybe wielding Doom Axe will be actually an interesting build to try out. Alright, now let's look into Fire. Actually, I think Fire is the most interesting one, because those are really hard to break in the game, and also there are so many areas with fire immunities that it was really preventing a lot of fire builds to play out, for example the Sorceress or Druid. So Sorceress will be kind of okay, the only problem that it doesn't work for Hydra, so the only weapon of choice will be Fireball, because frankly Meteor is really hot trash and the delay from the falling down is really preventing it from using, except maybe for bosses. Fireball Sorceress can be now viable, but you will still need either lower res on Plague or maybe Infinity. However, Druid, Fire Druid is going to be probably also the main fire theme in this patch actually. Fire Druid deals amazing damage, has a lot of variability what to use and for which purpose, and with the absence of immunities, way more places will be amazing for him to farm. It is also really interesting to see how Holy Fire Paladin will work out, for example with Hand of Justice, the Phoenix Shield and Dragon Armor, so this is going to be probably also very nice build to play this season. For the Amazon, considering there are still no changes to the Immolation or Explosive Arrow, they will be still quite on the weaker side. Maybe solo playing will be viable, but it's not going to be as good. And once again, the Fire Assassin, since this change doesn't work on traps, well, they are kind of dead. I'm pretty sure nobody will play Assassins at all. Alright, let's look into Lightning. Amazon. So now Amazon with Griffins, Infinity and the Charm. Basically, it just goes to Chaos Sanctuary, next to the gate of it, throws one spear and even Diablo will be dead. Sorceress, also very good, although again, you will still need Infinity to bring down those resistances really down. and thanks to the massive lightning mastery input, you will have really huge damage against almost all monsters. So this is also kind of, making those face rolling builds even stronger. Paladin, Holy Shock Zealer. This one could be also quite interesting thanks to the Crescent Moon that is quite easy to make for your Zeal attacks and also minus lightning resistances, considering you get Griffins at some point and maybe eventually you will get Infinity on your Mercenary. So this could be also one of the interesting builds because thanks to absence of immunities you can bring down those resistances really low so you deal a lot of damage with those Holy Shock procs. And once again, Assassin, Trapassin will be probably dead. It is quite sad to see that this change is not benefiting Assassins at all, although they are still good. Of course the Death Sentry and Fire Blast will be amazing build. Alright, now we go into the territory of less useful changes, so Poison. Right, let's be fair, there are only 2 builds in the game that really use Poison and are viable. So first of all, Necro is really OP, because previously you would only be able to break the immunities with a lower resist, but now you break the immunity with a charm and then lower resist brings the resistances almost to 0. Damage from Poison Nova really skyrockets, so it is really strong addition to the damage output. Not that it was really needed it, because obviously you still have your corpse explosion, amplify damage, so you would still be able to kill everything, and on top there are honestly not so many poison immunes in the game. But again, considering we're farming terror zones, this will be a good addition to prevent necromancers hitting some hard blocks in terms of poison immune enemies. For the Amazon, I would say this is only just a good change because they will be able to deal with those monsters, but since they don't have really easy access to lower res, which is the only source of reducing poison resistances, it will be kind of difficult. They also cannot use 3-piece trunk set because, well, they cannot wear necro heads, so this is not also a way to go. Potentially you can use Plague Rune Word on your Act 5 Mercenary, or maybe using a lower res wand on a swap, which is kind of not so efficient. Rabies Druid, well, I guess not this time. Alright, let's now think about magic. So one point here is that there are very few magic immunities in the game, so really I don't think that magic charm will be that useful, considering that it also provides minus magic resistances which are really hard to offset. Frankly speaking, Necromancer Bone Necro will be still as it was, Paladin Hammer and Feast of the Heavens will be also the same strength I would imagine, and Zerker Barbarian will be on the same level. So I don't think really magic charm will be useful at all. Maybe if you want to farm Bale Waves or Bale for experience, then you can do it in solo now. And lastly, let's talk about physical. So first of all, there are actually 4 builds that can really benefit from it. It is a Necromancer, who now can also explode things, Stone Skins and physical immunes even easier with a Corpse Explosion with minus 100% of resistance from amplified damage. And then the melee trio. So first of all, it's a Zealer Paladin, Whirlwind or Frenzy Barbarian and Fury Druid. So those 3 typically don't face any physical immunity monsters, because those are typically ghosts and maybe a couple of stone skins. So really you normally don't care about those at all. However, if they do, now with this charm they can break it down and maybe get some Reaper Stall procs that will further reduce the resistance and make it life easier. However, offsetting 25% increased physical damage on them is really a game changer, because again, all the melee builds will really struggle with that, because you will get hit way harder and this will be really problematic. So I don't think this is a fair balance in terms of the penalty, and considering there are only the few occasions where this will be useful for physical damage dealing characters. It is also important that Sundering effect of these Grand Charms comes before any of the reducing resistances effects, such as Infinity Conviction, Lower Res Curse, Amplified Damage Curse, or minus to enemy resistance items. This change really improves all builds that are able to accumulate those minus enemy resistance to their particular type, except maybe for magic. So this does not really shift any meta. It rather makes some underpowered builds a little bit stronger, but not so much, because there is no balancing to their skills at all and damage output, but it makes all the S tier and like A tier builds even stronger. Alright, so what do I actually think about this particular feature for the ladder terror zones? Well, I would say this is actually a fun addition, because considering we are talking about only terror zones, there are of course a huge variety and mix of immunities and monsters, so being able to farm all of them is actually a very nice change. The not so fun part of it is that basically all the S tier characters will be able to face roll entire game without even thinking. If it's a terror zone or not terror zone, they will be able to completely annihilate any place in the game without really caring for anything. In that sense, my overall thoughts are that this is probably a good addition for the ladder theme, but not really a core game mechanic, because it feels as a band-aid to the overarching problem of basically having some immunities easily breakable with infinity, other immunities are really hard to break because lower res curse is not available easily, and then also not helping any physical dealing damage characters that much. So again, this change is kind of very imbalanced in terms of what it helps and what it not. And because of that, here are a few ideas for the core game mechanic that could be changed. So number one, of course, is to rebalance immunities that they can be broken. I'm looking at all the cold, poison, magic and fire immunities that are typically the hardest one to break, because there are not so many venues for them, and usually all the monsters have really high resistances that are not breakable by the conviction or lower res curse. Secondary, I would also argue that we should add more ways to break immunities for each mercenary. So typically what we know now is that Act 2 mercenary with Infinity or Reaper Stall or maybe Act 5 mercenary with a Lawbringer are the ways to break some of the elemental immunities and some of the physical immunities. However, we don't really have that many options for Act 1 mercenary and also way more options for Act 5 mercenary. What I would suggest is to provide a bow, for example the Pass Peter crossbow that can be equipped on Act 1 mercenary with higher percent chance to cast lower res proc with higher lower res level. At the same time, it would be great if, for example, Witch Wild String can have also higher level of amplified damage proc and also higher chance, so then Act 1 mercenary can also break physical immunities. This will add variability. Act 2 Mercenary seems to be in more or less good place with Reaper Stall and also Infinity Rune Word, while Act 5 Mercenary is clearly lacking some elemental resistance breaking opportunity. Yes, there is a Plague Sword, but I would rather switch it to act on the striking instead of on getting struck. That would also make it more reliable, although also quite expensive Rune Word for the Mercenary. And lastly, my main point for the core game would be to actually add new endgame zones, maps or rifts, so basically call it what you want, that are actually designed around how the game is played right now. So basically it's an area level for magic finding, so you can get all the items, also maybe improving a little bit with the area level experience that you get while leveling up, and eventually also improving the density for a bit more chances to get runes. And finally, immunities, because most efficient builds right now are a single element that fully synergize that particular type of damage and really go full on with all the gear, stacking minus res and so on. So make sure that new endgame zones actually lack one immunity, and you can make different zones so that each elemental build can farm there with high efficiency, and of course on top it would be great to have some kind of variable bonuses and difficulties that are added to that zone in the end. So if you like these ideas, do share in a comment. I would be really interesting to hear from you what would you want in a core game to be added. Thank you for watching and see you next time.